The roar of engines cut through the late afternoon like a threat. 3 dark pickup trucks appeared on the dirt road, covered in dust and without license plates, until they crashed through the rusty fence of the old farm. The chicken stirred, the dog barked once and hid. In the middle of the field, Ezekiel Moran, a grey-haired farmer of few words, looked up slowly, showing no sign of surprise. The men got out, armed, jeering loudly, as if they already owned the place. One of them stepped on the ripe tomatoes in the garden and spat on the ground. "This place has an owner now!" shouted another. But Zeke didn't argue. He just picked up his straw hat and went into the barn. What they didn't know is that inside there slept a past that no cartel was ready to face. And what would come next? You won't believe it. Zeke entered the barn with slow but steady steps. The sound of the boards creaking beneath his boots echoed as if the floor acknowledged the weight of a past no one remembered. Inside, amidst the ancient tools and the smell of old oil, he stopped in front of a section of the floor that seemed too ordinary to attract attention. He crouched down, carefully pushed aside 2 loose boards, and revealed a dark compartment. Hidden there for decades were objects that had saved lives and taken others. Outside, the invaders' screams grew louder. They kicked doors, knocked over furniture, tore down curtains with the arrogant certainty of those who believe they are in control. But they didn't know what the old man was made of, nor how much he had already endured in silence. The abandonment of the government, the loneliness of the years, the weight of memories that haunted him every night. He wasn't just a farmer. He was someone who had buried his brothers in uniform with his own hands. Someone who learned to bear the pain in silence, because screaming never brought anyone back. If this story has made you feel something, if at some point you thought of someone who was also forgotten, ignored, underestimated, leave a comment below with what touched you the most so far. Your voice can help this message reach more people, reminding them that there are still silent heroes. Like this video if you believe that respect and honor never grow old, and subscribe to the channel to continue receiving stories that need to be told, and that perhaps only find life because you are here to listen. But at that moment, as the evening light filtered through the cracks in the barn, Zeke closed the metal safe and stared at the ceiling. Not with fear, but with the calm of someone who already knows exactly what they're going to do when night falls. Zeke remained crouched, his knees creaking like the ancient hinges of that barn he had once built with his own hands. The metal safe now open before him looked more like a time capsule than a hiding place. Inside, everything was still intact. The maps folded with almost military precision, the long-range radio that still crackled when turned on, the scratched compass, the old tactical watch showing a time that no longer existed. Each object was a silent reminder of who he had been, and what he had been forced to bury in order to survive civilian life. Outside, laughter echoed. Laughter that had no respect. Laughter from someone who has never had to crawl across the ground in a foreign country while bullets whizzed by inches from their ears. One of the intruders entered the house without knocking, kicking the door down. Another went to the living room closet, took the picture of Zeke's wife off the wall, and shook it like it was ancient trash. "Is that the queen of that pigsty?" he scoffed, before dropping it onto the wooden floor, the glass shattering with a loud crack. Zeke heard it like a punch to the chest. He didn't stand up. He didn't scream. He just closed his eyes and clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Inside, an old memory throbbed loudly. The image of his wife, Lucy, with a scarf tied around her head and a tired smile on her face, planting lavender in the garden. She had held this home together alone while he served away. It was her temple, and now they were desecrating it. Everything. He took a deep breath, long, like he did before a shot. But it wasn't a shot that would come now. It was something slower, more calculated. Something that was born in hostile jungles, in silent swamps, where only those who knew how to wait survived. And he knew it. Time was his ally. The terrain, his weapon. The invaders still thought they had control. But each second of silence was part of a response that was already being built, piece by piece. In the barn, Zeke opened a side compartment in the floor and pulled out a smaller box wrapped in black tarpaulin. Inside were coded tape, a pair of weather-hardened leather gloves, a folded piece of paper with coded notes. His hands shook slightly, not from fear but from memory. He remembered perfectly the last time he'd used it. It had been in southern Colombia, during an extraction mission. 3 people had gone in. Only he had come back, and he'd never spoken of it to anyone again. Meanwhile, one of the cartel men was kicking one of Zeke's dogs in the yard, laughing loudly. Another was firing shots into the air, trying to intimidate the neighbors who didn't even exist. Here, miles from the nearest police station, there would be no backup. They knew that, and it made them feel invincible. Little did they know that it wasn't backup they had to fear. It was the very ground beneath their feet. Zeke put his tactical watch on his wrist. He adjusted the radio and listened for the sounds of his invaders through micro frequencies. He had hidden transmitters in strategic spots around the terrain. Small, inconspicuous, still working thanks to rechargeable batteries that he himself had installed as a precaution years ago. They were everywhere, and they had no idea. In the house's bathroom, one of the men urinated on the floor, mocking the lack of luxury. In the bedroom, another was rummaging through drawers, laughing at a collection of old letters. "Look at this! Grandpa sent me a little note from the war," he mocked. They were letters that Lucy had kept since the time when Zeke was fighting outside. She read each one carefully. I would respond even if I wasn't sure if he would read it back. That was all that was left of them. Slowly, Zeke climbed the barn stairs, holding on to the wooden railing. With each step, he remembered Lucy sitting on that porch, sewing with her frail hands. He remembered the nights when she shivered in the cold, and he covered her with his body, even after days of working under the scorching sun. He remembered the cancer, the silence of the doctors, the last time she smiled, telling him everything would be okay, even though she knew it wouldn't. At the top of the barn, he adjusted his binoculars and watched the movement. He analyzed every path, every break in the pattern, every moment when one of the men strayed from the group. His gaze was clinical, trained, cold, but his heart was on fire. Down there, they were trampling on his life, his history, everything that was left of him, and he was still deciding whether to let any of them leave. If you felt a lump in your throat up until now, comment. They didn't know who they were dealing with. This helps keep this space alive for those who value respect, memory, and justice. Without haste, without noise, Zeke came down from the barn and walked to the shade of the oak tree. It wasn't just an observation point. It was there that Lucy liked to sit on warm afternoons, with a glass of iced tea in her hand and her feet bare. He sat down on the same worn log, took a deep breath, and looked up at the orange evening sky. And in that moment, something inside him changed. But to understand what would come next, we need to delve deeper into the past that he spent years trying to hide. The makeshift antenna shook slightly in the wind as the radio hissed with that harsh sound only those who have lived on the edge recognize. Zeke turned the dial with his fingertips, searching for the right frequency. Each click in the earpiece was a memory that came back like a punch to the gut. On the analog screen of the device, he adjusted with almost surgical precision, not because he expected help, but because he wanted to hear his enemies before they could hear him. And he was listening. The voices were there, uncoordinated, rude, mocking. They had no discipline, but they had weapons, arrogance, and a thirst for power. From the top of the hill behind the barn, Zeke watched the farm like a silent shepherd watching wolves prowl his flock. With his old binoculars pressed to his face, he saw everything. The man in the backward cap urinating on the porch. The other man sleeping with his feet up on the wooden table he had carved himself years ago. And a third, younger man, rummaging through the shed, the very place where he had first set up the warning. Zeke didn't blink. All he could hear was the echo of a past that had never fully healed. It was 1993 when he first used that radio to escape a trap in a village in chaos, deep in Central America. 3 men had gone with him on that mission. Only he had returned. One of them, Louis, was like a brother. Zeke still dreamed of the way he looked, lost in the woods, trapped under fire. It was Zeke who dragged him on his back, while blood marked the ground like red paint. With each step, a promise that he would not leave him. But he didn't. Louis's body remained there, buried under leaves, with his chest open and his eyes still half closed. The command told him to forget. Move on. And he did. But he never forgot. In the present, the young cartel member walked deeper into the warehouse and stepped on something nearly invisible. A thin fishing line stretched taut, as if holding air. A second later, click. But no further sound came. Not yet. The device had been rigged to go off after a delay, long enough to make the intruder think he was safe. Zeke had learned this in training camps that were never recorded in official records. Traps weren't supposed to scare. They were supposed to deceive. As the sun slowly sank behind the mountains, the temperature began to drop. The chill of the evening felt on Zeke's face, but what really chilled his skin was the memory of the day he returned home after decades away. And there was no one waiting for him anymore. Lucy was already gone. Her last breath came 2 days before the plane landed. He never forgave himself for that. He carried the folded paper of her medical record in his pants pocket to this day, as a voluntary punishment. Multiple organ failure. Dry words written in pen, as if they didn't speak of an entire love. There, on that silent hill, with the radio hissing and the wind carrying the smell of earth, Zeke cringed for a moment. A man bent by pain, but still whole by the mission. He knew he couldn't fail, because that land was more than land. It was memory. It was all he had left, and now, invaded, dirty, mocked by men who thought they could do anything, he felt something different crawl up his spine, an old but cold fury, a decision that required no words, just action. In the living room of the house, one of the bandits found a chest with old documents. He started laughing out loud. "Look at that! Grandpa was some kind of war hero or something!" And threw on the ground one of the certificates Zeke had received for a rescue mission in Somalia. It was the only memory he had kept. Not for honor, but because Lucy said that that piece of paper was the only proof that he wasn't making it all up. Meanwhile, the wires from the trap in the shed were slowly connecting to a small bottle hidden high up on the beam. Acid, copper wire, a small automatic spark. All handmade, all functional. The intruder was still walking around, kicking old tools, until he stopped next to the mechanism. Zeke watched silently, breathing through his mouth, timing himself. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. That was the line that was never crossed. And she had been crossed. In Zeke's head, the scene of the ambush in '93 came back like a movie on repeat. The explosions, the screams, the smell of burning flesh mixed with mud and leaves. This was the mission that destroyed his faith in military leadership. Not because I lost friends, but because I saw how they were forgotten. Names crossed out with cold pen in secret reports, a system that only thanked with silence. It was there that he decided he would never fight for flags again. Only by people. And now, the invaders mocked these people. Inside the house, one of them found Lucy's box of letters. He opened it and began to read aloud sarcastically. "My love, I still wait for you every night," he said, imitating a woman's voice. Another laughed, patting his colleague on the back, encouraging him. The paper tore between his filthy fingers. That hurt Zeke like a gunshot. He closed his eyes and swallowed hard. There was no more time. With precise movements, he descended the hill and approached the side of the house. Each step on the ground was silent. He had spread sand in the right spots days ago, preventing the sound. With the radio attached to his belt, he set the timer button. The trap was set, and the awakening would be soon. Meanwhile, the last light of day fell on Zeke's face, revealing lines that bore more than age. They bore difficult decisions, definitive losses, battles without applause. Each wrinkle was a living memory. Each scar, a chapter of the story that no one ever wanted to hear, but that he never forgot. And in that moment, with his eyes fixed on the porch where Lucy used to wait for him with a cup of tea, Zeke took the first step towards taking back what was his. Comment there. You don't joke about the pain of someone who has already lost everything, because this is still a long way off, and what is to come will change everything. The explosion of the truck cut through the morning silence like thunder from the bowels of the earth. The explosion threw pieces of the vehicle meters away, staining the sky with thick black smoke that danced over the crops. The ground shook. The chickens ran away in despair. And the men, those who had been laughing at the fragility of others just minutes before, now ran like rats on a sinking ship. They shouted incoherent orders, pointed their weapons at nothing, and one of them even tripped and fell face down on the ground, staining his face with blood and shame. From the top of the ravine, between the yellow leaves of dry grass, Zeke observed everything with controlled breathing. A small round mirror, held in the palm of his hand, reflected the hurried steps of his enemies. It was an ancient technique, taught in a base so remote that it didn't even have a name. In the jungles, when everything around you wants to kill you, you learn to use even what you carry in your pocket as a weapon. Zeke's mirror had already saved lives, and now it was useful again in a terrain that he knew every inch of, where he himself had planted, harvested, buried memories. And now he would bury fear. The men were disoriented. One of them was shouting, "It's sabotage! Someone's here!" Another tried to use the radio, but all he could hear was a hiss. The frequency was being blocked by short-range interference, something so subtle that they didn't even notice. Deep down, they still thought they had control of the situation. They believed they were dealing with a stubborn old man, a country dweller with no resources. Little did they know that they were up against a predator, and that they were already in a trap. They didn't know it, but the hunt had begun before they even stepped through the gate. Zeke slid slowly to the side, like a shadow in the bushes. The smell of earth mixed with the smoke from the explosion brought back difficult memories. Smells that only those who have been to war zones recognize: burnt rubber, cold sweat, dust, and fear. One of the cartel soldiers, the youngest, was shouting swear words in the middle of the yard. He said he wanted to leave. I was in a panic, and he was right. It wasn't the right place to be at that time. Meanwhile, another member of the group was scanning the area with a flashlight, even though the sunlight was already illuminating the field. He was shaking. He was sweating. He was firing random shots into the cornfield, as if he expected something to run away. But nothing moved. Because Zeke didn't run. He waited. He planned. And he acted at the exact moment. The silence that followed the explosion was more ominous than the sound itself. It was a tense void, as if the earth itself was waiting for something, and it was. Under one of the old logs near the pigsty, Zeke had buried a small thermal capsule. Inside it was a vibration-sensing device. As soon as it detected movement above a certain weight, the internal alarm would go off. But not an audible alarm. A silent electrical pulse, direct to his radio, and he had just felt the vibration travel up his wrist. Someone was there. At once, Zeke crawled over to the old grain silo, where he had kept dusty tools and memories for years. Inside, hidden among sacks of feed, was a metal tube with 3 heat markers, adapted from an old night vision device. He positioned them like invisible beacons. And then he heard it. Footsteps. 2. Maybe 3. They were coming toward him, but he didn't know it. The lens reflected human shapes, sweaty, armed, but lost. Zeke remembered one particular moment in 1997, an infiltration mission in a village north of Niger. One misreading of the map, one step off the trail, and his squad was ambushed. He was trapped for 23 hours under the rubble of a building, his leg crushed and his mouth full of sand. His radio didn't work. He had to pull out a tooth so he could use the gold wire as a makeshift conductor to generate a signal. 23 hours of listening to muffled screams and distant gunshots. He only survived because he decided not to give in to despair, because even when all seems lost, there is always a way out. He learned that through pain. And now I was applying the same mindset there, at home, on the land where I wanted to grow old in peace, in the place where he buried the woman he loved with his own hands, in a simple coffin, made by him. The same land where today, they dig their own ruin. When he saw the invaders split up, Zeke activated a second mechanism. Nothing to draw attention to, just a slight pressure on the ground behind the shed. The heaviest of the men was walking in that direction. When his foot touched the right spot, the ground gave way. An old boar trap, covered in dry leaves. The body fell, and the scream came loud, desperate. The sound of bones hitting stones echoed across the field. Now the panic was official. The other two ran to the hole, armed, trying to understand what had happened. And at that moment, they turned their backs on the barn. Zeke took advantage of the distraction to leave the silo, not running, but walking, with the precision of someone who knows what he's doing. In silence, in total control of the situation. The older dog, who was sleeping under the porch, raised his head and didn't bark. He just watched him. He knew that his owner had gone back to his old self, and that there would be no mercy. Write in the comments. He just wanted peace, but they brought war. Because Zeke's next decision will reveal what really happens when you try to destroy a home built on sacrifice. The house was in turmoil. The shouts were uncoordinated, the footsteps pounding against the floorboards like hammer blows of pure desperation. The water in the cistern, once clean, now had an acrid, almost unbearable smell, the result of a subtle mixture of laundry detergent and kerosene that Zeke had mixed the night before. The men spat at the first sip, coughing as if they were choking on gasoline. They tried to use rags to filter the water, but it was too late. The trust in this place had evaporated like the smoke from the burning truck. And then came the pig. A common animal on the property, Zeke had fed it without much pretense for years. But now, wearing an old, patched and dirty camouflage vest, it seemed like a living warning. The animal ran wild through the bushes, knocking down fences and spreading fear. One of the younger cartel members swore he saw someone in the dark, dressed like a soldier. They shot in all directions, shouting confusing orders, as if they could hit fear with bullets. In an attempt to escape to the road, one of the invaders ran without looking at his feet. You stepped where you shouldn't have. A hole covered in leaves, camouflaged among rocks and roots. A hunting trap Zeke had learned to build from an old Alabama hillbilly in the 1970s. The man fell hard. A dry crack rang out, followed by a scream of pain. Broken leg, damaged radio, blood running between the fingers. He shouted for his colleagues, but no one moved. Fear kept them frozen. Inside the house, the atmosphere was becoming unbearable. One of them wanted to burn everything down. Another screamed that there was no way out. A third, the most violent, threatened his companions with his own gun. The tension between them was no longer with Zeke. It was now between themselves. What had been a group had become a huddle of scared men trying to survive the unknown. And the most disturbing thing was that none of them really knew. Power facing. Zeke stood at the top of the barn, still, calm, controlling everything like an invisible conductor. He had been through much worse sieges. He had faced psychological torture, sleep deprivation, extreme hunger, isolation. Once, he had been locked in a metal cell during a desert lightning storm, interrogated for 3 days straight. They didn't tell him his name. They didn't give him food. But what they didn't know was that he had been broken before and rebuilt from the inside, colder. More calculating, more dangerous. The radio clipped to Zeke's belt crackled on an empty frequency. He adjusted the dial, hearing faint noises, and then voices. Broken Spanish, whispers among the cartel members. They were losing control. They talked about giving up, about getting out of here, about begging for forgiveness. One of them suggested that the old man be left alone. But the leader, a man who went by Gallardo, wouldn't take any humiliation. We're going to find this bastard and show him who's boss. Zeke let out a soft sigh, not from exhaustion, but from grief, because he already knew that, at that moment, they had crossed a line of no return. It was then, as he shifted his position on the barn's lining, that he felt something slip from his vest pocket. A metallic sound hit the dirt floor. Clim. A small medal, already worn by time, covered in soot, rolled slowly and stopped near the wall of the room. One of the men noticed it, approached curiously, and picked it up. He wiped it with his shirt sleeve, read it in a low voice, and turned pale. Zay Moran. Recon Unit. Bravo Team. The name seemed to burn on the tongue. Another man, older, turned sharply. What's that? Show me this. When he read it, he took 2 steps back as if he had seen a ghost. The name circulated as a legend in criminal circles. One of the ghosts of the old school. One that, according to stories told in prisons in northern Mexico, had eliminated an entire warehouse in Ecuador, without leaving a trace. They said it was a name that the older cartel bosses still respected, or they feared. And now, they were in his house. The penny dropped with a silent thud. This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't madness. They were surrounded. By one man, but a man with a past that no one there would come away from unscathed. Gallardo tried to stand his ground. He called the rest with shouts of command. He said they would resist, that no one would run away, that they would end it that very night. But the looks of others already said otherwise. There was doubt. And the doubt, at that moment, was the difference between surviving and dying. From up there, Zeke could see everything. And for a moment, he felt sorry. Not because I thought they deserved pity, but because I knew what was coming. Did you know that some men only understand one language, that of fear, and that sometimes it is necessary to show the weight of the hidden truth that they tried to ignore? That not every soldier retires, and some remain silent, just waiting for the moment to stand up. Comment there. They underestimated the wrong person, because what Zeke is going to do now is going to make it clear that in that land, no one steps foot with impunity. The silence that took over the room after the medal was read was brutal. It wasn't the usual silence of someone who keeps quiet for lack of anything to say. It was the kind that sets in when fear crosses the throat before words. The entire cartel felt it. It was no longer about territory, nor about money, nor about power. It was about survival. A name had been spoken, and that name carried weight. The weight of legend, of death, of stories whispered between bars and concrete corridors in prisons where even the bravest lowered their eyes when they heard it. Zeke Moran, the man who, according to rumors, had carried out an entire mission in southern Ecuador without ever being filmed. Who had dismantled a drug trafficking ring on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border with methods so clean that not even the bodies were found. They said he operated under the radar, that he was called upon only when diplomacy failed and the noise of war needed to be silenced in the dark. To the cartel, he was not a veteran. He was a ghost. And now, they were trapped in his house. Gallardo, the leader of the group, tried to regain control. He shouted orders, ordered everyone to arm themselves, swore that no one runs away, no one bows to any old man. But the tremor in his voice left no doubt. One of the younger men dropped his gun and ran out the back door. He took 3 steps before he heard the click dry. A small sound. Discreet, but fatal. The ground exploded in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. The traps were active, and now they knew. That's when Zeke showed up. He didn't run away. He didn't shout. He didn't point a gun. He just walked. Slowly. Steady. From the back of the plantation, like a shadow taking shape. He was wearing an old tactical vest from his service days, stained with soot and dust. His boots were soaked with mud. His face was covered in a black stain made from charcoal and burnt oil, just like he had done on the silent raids of the past. He walked as if he didn't have to explain himself, as if he already knew what was coming next. He stopped in the middle of the field, in full view of everyone. The few people still on the balcony backed away without realizing it. Fear had already taken over. It was him, the same man the cartel's elders spoke of in hushed tones, as if his very name brought bad luck. "You crossed the wrong line." That's all he said. There was no hysteria, no threats. His voice was low, almost hoarse, but each syllable cut through the air like a sharp knife. There, in that moment, no one was thinking about reacting anymore. Only about fleeing. Only about getting out alive. And yet, it wasn't that simple. The fences were mined, literally. Zeke had spent the last 3 years transforming the perimeter of the property into a web of deterrence. An unconventional minefield of pressure sensors, mechanical traps, and even fake bait. Not because he expected an attack, but because he knew that real peace required preparation. He knew that the world did not forgive those who slacked off. And he never slacked off. At the back of the room, one of the men knelt. Not by choice. His legs had given out. Another began to cry, his face buried in his hands. The screams stopped. The weapons began to be dropped on the floor, one by one. Zeke didn't move. He watched, as if waiting for the enemy to realize for himself the extent of his mistake. And in that moment, he thought of Lucy. He thought of her sitting on that same porch years ago, hand-sewing a tablecloth. He thought of her eyes, brown and tired, waiting for him night after night. He thought of how she would say, "One day, my love, all this will be ours alone, and in peace." And how that peace never came while she was alive. How she left without hearing a, "It's over, it's over." And that was what hurt the most, having survived everything but time. Maybe that's why he was here now. Not to punish, but to protect what was left. The memory, the promise, the land. He didn't want to be remembered as a murderer, but he also wouldn't accept being forgotten as just another man. Gallardo, already sweating coldly, took a step forward. He tried to say something. His voice failed. Then he tried something else. He knelt. He lowered his head. He begged. "Mr. Moran, we didn't know. I swear, we didn't know who you were." Zeke kept his gaze steady, and in that silence, full of everything he was, of what he had lost, of what he still held in his chest, he turned around. He started walking again, slowly, without saying anything else. Not because he had forgiven, but because he had chosen not to carry any more blood. Comment there. Those who have history don't need to prove anything. Because what happens when a ghost chooses to appear will still mark the journey of everyone who survives that night. The sun had barely broken over the horizon when the first vehicles appeared on the dirt road, raising fine dust beneath their wheels. No fuss, no siren. All calculated. The authorities arrived guided by a single signal, a silent homing beacon from an old sat phone buried beneath a marked stone in the ground, activated with a sequence of clicks on the tactical radio. A protocol Zeke saved for when words were no longer needed. And that morning, they weren't. The scene the agents encountered was something out of a military black ops report, the kind that is never officially recorded. The field was quiet. The leaves of the field swayed slowly in the wind, and in the center of the field, in front of the simple house, a row of men knelt, tied up, unarmed, blindfolded, and with drawn faces. No serious injuries, not a drop of blood visible. But defeat was etched in every muscle. Zeke didn't wait for the arrival. He was on the porch, kneeling in front of a shallow flower bed, watering the pepper seedlings as he did every morning. The same aluminum watering can, dented on one edge. The same gestures. Slow, careful. The shirt stained with dirt. The boots covered in dew. It was as if nothing had happened. As if that dawn had been just another night under the vast Texas sky. The more experienced officer approached cautiously. He had been warned, discreetly, that this operation was not common. But even so, what he saw made him swallow hard. He made a hand signal, and his colleagues spread out to check the area. The tension that had seemed to pulse through the trees hours before now gave way to a disconcerting calm. "Report says the area is clear," the agent announced. Zeke didn't respond. He just stood up slowly, wiped his hands on a cloth tied to his waist, and nodded. He didn't look anyone in the eye. He didn't ask any questions. He gave no explanation. The serious but serene face, as if he was just there taking care of what was his, like any simple man would do in his land. But everyone knew. Everyone felt it. That he wasn't just any man. None of the invaders had the courage to open their mouths. No resistance. Some were still shaking. Others, blindfolded, murmured prayers. One of them fainted during transport. Whatever had happened on that property, it had left scars that time would not heal. Zeke had done what he had always done: protect what was important. Only now. The enemies had different faces. Tattoos, modern weapons, plenty of arrogance. But the essence was the same as the ancient enemies. Men who respect nothing until something forces them to their knees. As the vehicles drove away, taking the cartel men one by one, the sound of peace once again took over everything. The gentle wind, the distant barking of the dog, the rustling of dry branches. And Zeke went back to what he was doing before. He sat down on the porch chair. He took out an old notebook and began scribbling collection notes. His trembling hand, marked by scars, held the pencil as if holding a piece of the life he still had left. There was no glory, no pat on the back, and there was no need for it. Zeke didn't want applause. He never did. Medals rust, recognition evaporates. What he wanted was exactly what few understand. A corner of the earth where he could grow old without having to remember, every day, how cruel the world can be to those who have given their all. But the world doesn't forget so easily. Because every time someone new passes that road and sees the rusty gate with the symbol of an old squadron etched with a knife, he whispers something different. A warning. A warning to anyone thinking of crossing the line out of arrogance. A ghost lives there. And he remembers everything. If you've stayed this far, it's because you felt something different in this story. Maybe you remembered someone who also carries scars in silence. Or maybe you saw yourself somewhere along the way, fighting for peace in a world that insists on testing limits. If so, leave a comment below. This land has an owner. Just so I know you were with me until the end. Like this video if, at some point, this journey really touched you. It helps this type of content live on, and allows more people to find these stories that almost no one tells. And if this type of narrative speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. There's still a lot to come. And I want you to walk this road with me. There's a video here on the side that completes everything we've seen so far. Click there and continue with me there. The next story could be even stronger than this one.